Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer, and if you are listening to us on one of the many fine podcast platforms at which you can find our podcast, you can also watch us on YouTube. If you are watching us, you can also find us. You can listen to us anywhere fine podcasts are found. Please leave a review, subscribe, let your friends know, let your family members know, let your friends and family members know all about the Lunch Hour. Very excited to have our guest join us today. I actually just recently interviewed him when I was doing some fill-in work on Tony Katz's show, and I said, I've got to get him back for a longer interview on the Lunch Hour. His name is Kevin Cirilli. He is a contributor to The Hill and a visiting media fellow in the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub. Yes, Kevin, I'm going to read your entire bio here. He was recently chief Washington correspondent for Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio, where he worked for nearly 6 years and was one of the youngest chief Washington correspondents in broadcast journalism history. Cirilli brings his unique background in geopolitics, global business, print and broadcast media, political communications, and regulatory affairs as a nonpartisan policy-based reporter, something near and dear to my heart here on this podcast. Cirilli's expertise is rooted in building trust and technology infrastructure networks among like-minded stakeholders. You're going to have to explain that to me at some point, who believe in democratic principles. He has covered how democracies work through public-private partnerships, investment, and financing to counter authoritarianism. Prior to Bloomberg, he worked for Politico, Pro Financial Services in the Hill, where he helped launch the daily overnight finance tip sheet, where he frequently covered the Export-Import Bank. He grew up in suburban Philadelphia's Delaware County, which he's very passionate about. In his free time, he enjoys Philadelphia's food scene and running. Kevin, so glad you can join us today. And let's start here, because I just had a conversation with Clifford May, who is the head of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, talking about this issue of democracy and democracy building. But let's talk about this line from your bio, rooted in building trust and technology infrastructure networks among like-minded stakeholders who believe in democratic principles. Explain that to all of us.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Always.
And Clifford is just, such a tour de force in his own way. And, it's so humbling even to hear you use his name. He's awesome. So I think what it means essentially when I say democratic principles, and thank you for reading that. That was very kind. Democratic principles, these are things that we all believe to be true as Americans. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to be who we are, freedom to be who we are and as we are born as. Yeah. And I think that many times we take that for granted. And I don't want to get on a soapbox to start, but I'll just speak from my own personal experience growing up outside of in suburban Philadelphia and Delco, and then becoming a journalist and specifically traveling and embedded in the Trump 2016 presidential campaign. At that time, it was 2015. Yeah. And nobody thought that he had a chance to become president. And I was going to... Hold
that thought for a second. I got in trouble with a host once that I was filling in for because I said that I had more of a chance of being elected president than Donald Trump did. So set that all aside here. It shows you how much I know.
Because at that point, I was in my early to mid 20s and I was just chucked around the country. I mean, I was going to all of these towns that I had never known existed because the news never talks about them. And I was interviewing thousands of voters and protesters. And I don't want to, sensationalize. Maybe it wasn't thousands. I don't want to quantify it. Maybe it was hundreds.
Lots and lots of people.
Lots and lots of people. Yeah. But everywhere I went, I juxtaposed that with the message that I was hearing from the media, which was democracy is in decline. And I would think to myself and I would journal and I would say, I don't know what democracy they're looking at because the democracy that I'm seeing are now I will quantify thousands of people participating. Right. And they're showing up to the rallies or they're showing up to protest the rallies and they're engaging in the process. And then obviously over the last couple of years and the pandemic and whatnot, we've seen lots of protests. Some of them are not productive. Some of them are. But that's democracy in action and participating and showing up. And, building democratic trust amongst stakeholders on the digital frontier
Yes.
is just as important as building it in our topography and in our land. And so I witnessed both good and bad examples of things going from URL to IRL.
Okay, I love
from
it.
the web to in real life, as the kids say, now that I'm in my mid-30s. And that's what I'm talking about. And so I don't want to live in a world where I remember when I was coming up, everybody always remembers this, Andrew, where it was AOL, right? And you had that running person running and that remember that noise?
Yes, I can do the impression of that.
And it would, thank you, because I can't.
Yes.
And it was called AOL, America Online. I don't want to live in Putin online. I don't want to live in Xi Jinping online.
Right.
I can't imagine that and how dark that would be, because they don't believe in my ability to have freedom of speech and to criticize. And we can have it. We've been having a debate since 1776 about the limits of free speech. And we're having that now in the news. But the fact that we're even having it is what sets us apart.
Amen. Yes.
From Xi and from Putin and from all of the other bad actors.
It's interesting because we've had this conversation. Bob Levy, the venerated columnist for the Washington Post, he and I have talked at great length about this issue. And Leon Panetta came on the podcast, talked about it as well. And I think you are right. Right. It goes back to, regardless of what might have happened. Not that I want to make this a conversation about January 6th, because I really don't. But in the end, one of the things that I took away from it was that, as horrible a day as January 6th was, the day itself and the place of that day in American history, one of the lessons that I took away from it was that America endures, right? Even if you are a guy wearing a buffalo head helmet and you have your face and chest painted, you can't sit in the office of the Speaker of the House and proclaim yourself to be Speaker of the House. The institutions will continue to sort of say, no, the American government is going to endure here, regardless of some crazy person gaining access to the Speaker's house, right? I mean, do you take comfort in that, or is that part of what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's a harder question. I'm sorry. That's a weird question.
No, I would say, I mean, look, I've been on the record as saying this January 6th is a horrible day.
100%. No one's saying it's not.
But I will also say that I recently have become involved with Blue Star Families, which is an organization that works a lot with the folks that you just mentioned to support active duty military families. That's and great. Their big mantra is do your part.
Yes.
And so America endures, but only if we all do our part. And and that, I think for me in my 20s, that meant I felt a way that I could contribute to whatever this is in a very small part was to be a journalist. But as I've gotten older, I think that's going to evolve and change, especially as the media landscape changes. And so I think you are so fortunate to have a microphone. I've been fortunate in the past to have a microphone, but even if you don't have a microphone, it's, especially for young people, democracy is not just posting on social media.
Right.
It's actually not just talking, it's actually listening.
Yes.
And I think that's a big thing that we as a country collectively, and myself included, can do a much better job of, especially as we all look to participate to help for this to endure.
Right. It's interesting because NPR and StoryCorps, they have a project going in which it's about fostering conversations of people of widely divergent political beliefs. And that, I think, you raise the important point. It's not just important to be able to speak, but you have to be able to listen. My colleague here at the Federal Newswire and elsewhere, Jerry Rogers, the editor of Real Clear Policy, talks about in order to persuade, you need to be persuadable. And I think that's right. I mean, what are you cocked your head for it? Let me get your thoughts on that.
I was up over the summer in New Hampshire where I moderated a town hall with John Huntsman and Senator Joe Manchin. And I it's always interesting what the people that we interview have to say, but I always find that they're just a setting in this country. When I covered Trump was just in many ways, just a setting. It was the people around him and the people who supported him, the people who protested, similarly to AOC, similarly to the squad or whatever you want to call them. But to take it back to New Hampshire for a second over the summer, regardless of what the people on the stage told me, it was the people who packed the room and set a record of attendance because they either don't want him to run for president or they want him to run for president, or they're just intrigued. But what they told me was, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, and no one's talking to me.
Right.
I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, and I exist.
Yes.
And I think right now there are millions of people who are saying, I am not a Republican, I am not a Democrat, I exist. What are you doing, elected officials and all of the cottage multi-millionaire, billionaire people who industry that surrounds them? What are you doing to connect to those people? And quite honestly, I think it's uncomfortable for us in the media to talk about, but we've done a really poor job of communicating to people outside of the parameters of the way that we framed the national conversation. And I don't mean to just be a critic of it. I want to help talk about it, not to demonize media executives, but to,
no, of course not,
but to talk about, we got to reach people who see right through us and who say, why should I trust you?
When, in 2010, 2011, I was very active in the Maryland Republican Party. But then I read a book called The Declaration of Independence, ENTS, Declaration of Independence, by Nick Gillespie and Matt Welch from Reason Magazine, Reason Foundation. And that book changed my life because they talk about, now they call it the vast libertarian middle. Grover Norquist calls it the Leave Us Alone coalition, but they're people who simply, they live their lives and they're not political. They're not Republicans or Democrats. And I think you're correct. It's funny because I came up with an idea for a Survivor Apprentice-like game show that would go after this, because you're right. When it comes to the major media, they want to put everybody into a particular box. You're either column A, you're column B. You are, if you're Larry Hogan, we're gonna put you in the Republican box. If you're Joe Manchin, we're gonna put you in the Democrat box. And if you don't fit neatly into those categories, well, we don't know how to cover you. But I think you raise, actually, it gets into a really interesting essay that was put out a couple of years ago. And you grew up in Philadelphia, or just outside of Philadelphia, Delaware County. I don't know how much traveling you did as a kid, but this essay by this professor at George Mason University encourages folks to drive 50 miles in any direction from where they live. Now, obviously, if you live on the East Coast, you can't drive to the East. And anyway, but the point is, drive 50 miles away from where you live and have a conversation with somebody. Because that's, again, conversation is all about talking, but it's also about listening. This is part of what we're talking about, which is to talk to people that you might not otherwise meet, to get to understand them and how they live, right?
Well, for sure. And I'm not one of those people who says that technology is the worst thing to ever happen. I mean, listen, the internet, it makes life a lot easier.
Sure, of course.
I'm old enough to be of that weird generation that's just like the last generation that can remember life before the iPhone or whatever smartphone you had. Like, I remember when Steve Jobs came out on the stage and he goes, one more thing. And look, it's done a lot of good. I mean, it's changed everything. And that said, I think we also need to remember that whether it's AI or whether it's quantum or whether it's 6G or quantum or whatever you want, hypersonic, whatever, face-to-face communication, you're never going to be able to replace it. I don't care what anybody says. And so I think, to your point, I think it's really important, and it's so unfortunate. One of the worst things that happened in the pandemic was that people lost that. And I think that there's still this re-entry into back to life, not as it was, because I don't necessarily want to live in the time before the pandemic when we learned a lot going through that. But I think one of the things that was laid bare was just how far off the political discourse had gotten, and how, as a result of us taking our eye off the ball collectively, we became overly reliant on authoritarianism. And just look at your Amazon order for the holiday season to see where all your packages are coming from.
Right.
And those are packages, I still identify as a Catholic. That might surprise some people, but you look at what's coming up at the holidays and the over-reliance on China, but then you look at it from like a medical supply chain prism, and just the opioid addiction crisis. And I know there's this fight over whether TikTok should be banned and whatnot. I want to get into that.
No, we did. Definitely going to get into that. Yeah.
But, I think, again, we have to remember what we stand for, even if we're not always holding ourselves up to the highest example of that, at least we can check and balance each other. But it doesn't work if we're not talking and listening to one another.
So this gets into really how you introduced the topic, and you talked about Putin online and Xi Jinping online and the idea of authoritarian regimes and how they control the flow of information between people. Now, you are a visiting media fellow at the Atlantic Council and their Global China Hub. Talk about what the Atlantic Council is, because you gave a really great explanation of it on the radio the other day, but we need to repeat that here, and the work that you're doing, and talk about Xi Jinping, Xi online or Putin online, and how this all plays into it.
For sure. So look, the Atlantic Council has been around for more than 60 years.
Yeah.
It's NATO's think tank. And I'm the grandson of two grandfathers who served in World War II. Like all of your listeners have some connection to World War II. I never met my grandfathers. They passed away before I was born.
Wow.
But and I don't say that for, I mean, it's just, but I still, in my family makeup, I mean, to me, there's humble service of the ultimate sacrifice is something that I frequently reflect on, especially now, of what would that generation think to see what's happening right now all over the world from a military conflict. And so for me, it was, I wanted to, I really wanted to learn more about NATO, because I do believe in alliances. And look, this is what I would say. I think that the term globalist has been hijacked. I don't think people use it in the right word at all. If you're ordering off of Amazon, I guess by some people's definition, you're a globalist. But I think what many people would argue the true definition of globalism is to stand for America's principles, stand for democracy principles, and to not cave or sell out while you're doing international business, those principles, because international business has been around for forever. So I really push back against anyone who just throws around the G word, for lack of a better term, without using it accurately. Because if you've ever ordered off of Amazon, then technically by your own definition, you're a globalist. Oh no, you're a globalist. It's like, use it in the right word. If you're doing international business, then do it. So for me, NATO, and there are smart people who have argued that countries should pay their fair share. Absolutely. But let me tell you something, and I'm passionate about this, and it doesn't make me biased, is if you play golf and you pay to participate in your club or whatever golf course that you go to, or I don't really play golf. I didn't have any golf courses in Delco. There's one, but I never got in. But whatever you go to or whatnot, you show up and you have a debate over fees, but you show up. But if the golf course, isn't looking good or it's under attack, you show up even more. Right.
Yes.
And so with NATO, I think right now, when I hear people say, "Oh, we don't need to be in NATO," I'm like, "Well, why? What are you talking about?"
That's crazy. Yes. Agreed.
Saying that you want countries to pay their fair share. The reason we're all paying is so that when we're under attack and our values are under attack, we defend ourselves, we stand up for ourselves, and we support one another. It doesn't mean we just write a blank check.
It's interesting. Let me interrupt you for 1 second. About a little over 10 years ago, I was involved in the policy debates over whether or not the U.S. should ratify the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea Treaty, which sets up an international regime of property rights so that we know somebody can assign. So, if you want to go drill for rare earth materials, which are vital right now, you go and you apply and to the high authority in this, and they grant you your rights to go and do these things. And I had people argue up and down with me that, no, we can't do this. We should just be able to go and drill wherever. And, if there's a conflict between the U.S. and China, well, the U.S. military will sort it. And I'm like, that is insane. And to me, at least, it's an insane way of looking at the world, that we create a regime of private property rights so that people know what's theirs and what isn't there, so that you don't have to resort to force in order to defend what's yours. You have a legal framework that is in mind here. Now, that being said, of course, when we talk about globalism and globalists, what we don't want is some entity that we haven't had an agreement with exerting some kind of power or disempowering individuals to act on their own behalf. That's a problem. But when we have these, by virtue of negotiation, anytime there's a negotiation, one side can gain something, another side can lose something, but everybody is supposed to eventually come out in the head. I'm sorry for the rant here, but this is what we're talking about here is if we are a nation and we are a nation that wants to be on the world stage, we are going to have negotiations with others. We're going to have alliances with others. And sometimes, folks are going to fight within alliances. That doesn't mean that the alliances are a bad thing.
Well, and specifically as it relates to China, nobody wants war. No. Nobody wants war. I mean, I think
nobody on our side wants war, I should say, or very few.
Well said. Well said.
Yes.
Well said. Yeah. But nobody wants no rational person that I've ever interviewed or that I've ever interacted is saying, whatever against China, and because that's just not it at all.
Yes.
But that said, I think it doesn't mean that we can't have an honest conversation, because I do believe in freedom of speech. And I don't want to even get into COVID-19 because truthfully,
and I want to spend some time talking about China and the threats of China. So yeah,
I want to talk about opioids.
Yes, please.
I want to talk about opioids because this is something as a 34-year-old, and unfortunately everyone in America I'm sure can relate or know someone who's been touched by this or knows. And I think there's a debate about immigration. There's a debate about, drug cartels, but where are the drug cartels getting their supply from?
Right.
And who is financing them?
Hold on for a second, folks. Just what Kevin is saying is, it's not like the cocaine wars where there are these coca fields down in South America and Pablo Escobar is out there with his minions overseeing the harvesting of the coca crop, and there are these underground processing stations. These are fairly sophisticated pharmaceuticals that have to be created in a lab somewhere. Am I right here, Kevin? I mean, I just didn't want to take it. But
no, you are. And it's whether it's negligence or whether it's intentional, there's an academic debate about that. And I don't want to wallow in that, but I can tell you that everyone's saying China. President Biden has said himself that he talked with, as he describes him, a dictator, Xi Jinping, as Trump has described him, a dictator, Xi Jinping, about the opioid crisis. No one's not saying it's not China.
Right.
And so I think as an American, that infuriates me. And as someone who believes in freedom of speech, we need to ask more questions about that. How can we even fathom that the world's second largest economy, we're still number one.
Yeah.
The world's second largest economy is dumping this crap.
Right.
And killing tens of thousands of people. And you're going to tell me that it's negligence? Well, then do better.
Right. Of course.
Do better. And by the way, do better politicians in getting something done to put pressure on them to do better.
Yes. Agreed. No, and that's exactly it. It's one of those situations where it matters to some extent if it is negligence or purposeful. And obviously, but the real issue is the problem itself. And we have to address the problem, and we have to get to the root of curtailing this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, for sure. And so I think one of the questions that I always get asked specifically, and we talked about opioids and we talked about, putting more pressure on China as it relates to that, but also this notion of TikTok. Yes. And I think it's such a great example of what the media has oversimplified and where we as journalists can do a better job and communicators can do a better job, because no one in their right mind is saying to just get rid of an app because it's from China. That's actually not the conversation that we're having. Yeah. The conversation that we're having is about the company that owns TikTok. And the company that owns TikTok is Beijing based, which is called ByteDance. So Beijing ByteDance. And ByteDance is based in China. And as a result of that, they don't have the same principles that we in democracies have, which is a separation between the public and the private sector.
That's right.
That's why we have so much innovation in our country, is because it's not just being cooped up in a lab somewhere where no one can talk about it. And it's not just for certain people to create things. It's for anyone in America.
Right.
But specifically with ByteDance, there's no separation in China between the Communist Party and the business sector. They're one and the same. The Communist Party views business to deploy what's called economic warcraft.
Yeah.
It's not just military warcraft, it's economic warcraft. There's cyber warfare, there's military warfare, there's economic warfare.
Right.
And when you take
ByteDance, which deploys an app on teens and tweens phones. It's not just the data. It's also just the idea that a foreign government can have a platform in which Osama bin Laden goes viral
right
the same week that the leader of the Communist Party is present in domestic United States for the first time in 6 years.
And it would
and
be
by the way,
right.
before, and I know I'm on but I just want to get this in. I hear from certain folks who are engaged in this discussion that, what would happen for there to be to small businesses on TikTok and blah, 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 BS. I call BS, and I have to be able to say that. Sure. And here's why. I'm old enough to remember Zanga. I'm old enough to remember MySpace.
Right.
None of which are a thing anymore. And I think our economy survived.
Yes, absolutely. It did. And it's one of those things where it would be one thing if this were an aberration, right? If both China and Russia had not been spending years trying to influence young people in America, because, the teenagers and 20-somethings being influenced in the late 1960s and early 1970s by Russia are today's grandparents, and senior folks engaging in public policy. And they taught folks who became teachers who were influencing. And most recently, of course, I don't know if you have covered this or you consider them in the same vein I do, the Confucius Institutes on college campuses. Which is for those of you who are uninitiated, this was a seemingly benign effort by the part of China to create institutions to raise the awareness of what China was really about, educating young people, both college students and teenagers. In fact, I knew a young woman in Virginia who at a very young age was sort of sucked into those kinds of environments, and again, the idea is to change that thinking. I'm going to go and say manipulate thinking. And now China with TikTok has found a way to speed it up, accelerate it, innovate it. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm not betting on ByteDance. But specifically with regards to the Confucius Institute, and this doesn't really get covered on the media, but that's a completely nonpartisan issue. So there are Democrats like Senator Mark Warner, who's the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. He's a Democrat from Virginia. And there are other people like Mike McCall, who's obviously the chairman of the House Foreign Relations, who are he's a Republican from Texas. I mean, they're in lockstep on this. I mean, Rubio also, they're in lockstep on this, and it's not, and we have to say this, right? But no one is talking about perpetuating any type of discrimination against Asians or any Asian American, no one. And so when people hear Confucius Institutes, what it really is a ploy for espionage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just come out and say it. It's espionage by the CCP on college campuses to, again, start to get data on not just individuals, but also all of the important research that goes on at many of these universities throughout the country. And then separately from that, I just want to continue to hammer this home.
Please.
Saw earlier this year where the Biden administration, again, completely nonpartisan, was able, I think it was the FBI that went after and arrested some China espionage centers in Los Angeles. And so this is a very real threat. And luckily or thankfully, it has remained nonpartisan.
The story that got covered a little bit, I don't know about on the mainstream media, I know in some of the conservative areas, about the secret Chinese police stations in New York and elsewhere. It's all, and again, this is, as you said, not to cast aspersions on anybody of any ethnic background or societal background. This is about different kinds of warcraft that are being engaged in. China's got a very sophisticated policy at work, whether it's the economic warcraft, as you said, or this manipulation, the Belt and Road initiatives to sort of gain access to ports and infrastructure elsewhere. This is all serious stuff.
And they're also doing it on the digital frontier. Yeah. And I think that's where that's what I've spent my research in, which is, so all of the things that you outlined, whether it's a New York City cop station or whether it's, the Belt and Road Initiative running through parts of Africa, that's all on Earth, yes. in IRL, as I like to say, in real life. But in URL, or once it in the digital space, all of these networks that are being built, and who regulates those networks. And I'm not talking about from like a monetary tax perspective, but in terms of who actually built the system which these platforms operate on. The system of the system. I mean, I sound like I'm in the Matrix, but it's true. I mean, this is actually a friend of mine, a media executive, always says, you know, before it's science, it's fiction. I mean, well, we're living in the future. And so I think that's what I believe will be one of the biggest, if not the biggest conversation from a national security perspective in my lifetime, is going to be protecting the digital frontier and what exactly that looks like. Because if you own the digital space, in many ways, like, we don't have the Atlantic Ocean between us anymore.
Right.
When authoritarian regimes are programming our teens' cell phones.
Yeah. Right. And that's, to me, as a free speech near absolutist, if not absolutist, you know, watching the erosion of that as a value in our society, that's been disturbing. And I can't help but think, right, here's the thing, and I may have said this on the air the other day, I don't remember. So I was a Soviet studies major in college. You know, I got into this world because I was an ardent anti-communist. It's sort of how my early political viewpoints were formed. And, you know, it's, to me, understanding that when Nikita Khrushchev in the early 1960s said at the UN that he will be at the West funeral, right? He didn't say we will bury you, he said we will be at your funeral. And then knowing that they were going to spend the next 60 plus 70 years using the benefits of Western society, of classical liberal democracy, the institutions that we hold dear, to turn us against each other. You know, to me, it's no great mystery that, you know, after 60 years, you know, 6 decades of this, we are turned against one another. I mean, to me, am I crazy for thinking this? I guess, Kevin, that's my question to you.
I think, no, I mean, listen, I'm not going to argue with the notion that people are polarized. I mean, I'm not living under a rock. Sometimes it might be a better place. But sure. But I also really am. I also am particularly optimistic.
Good.
And I'm optimistic, not in a naive standpoint, but I'm optimistic at the participation that I see.
Sure.
And I don't believe television viewers are the only metric of participation. Nielsen is outdated. I cut the cord a while ago. I'm a YouTuber now. I mean, who would have thought? Don't tell my old college professors. but you know, the reason I'm optimistic is because of all the participation that I see. And look, I think that there are young people who have forced conversations to be had in this country that have enacted real significant policy changes that we have seen in our country. And I don't have to name what they are. I think we all know. I think the next part of that, which I hope to be in some way either covering or participating or whatever, is updating the policy conversations that we have that motivate people to show up. And what do I mean by that? I mean, to me, I don't have cable, but it's always on in Washington when you walk into a specific place, and it's the same stuff. I mean, it's literally a repeat episode. Left says this, right says this.
Of course, yes.
Republicans feel this demographic votes this way, this demographic can't vote for that. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, who the hell is talking about the gig economy?
Right.
Who the hell is talking about the lack of transparency going on at higher education institutions that, by the way, handed my whole generation a level of debt that makes it right next to impossible to purchase a first-time home?
Sure.
Who the heck is talking about this mental health crisis that is absolutely decimated? And this isn't just talking about your feelings or your emotions. This is real stuff that has absolutely hurt people. So I don't see those debates, those smart intellectual debates happening. And that's what everybody in my life is talking about.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I get back to this. Has been my problem with these first, 4 Republican presidential debates. in which it's been all about, and it was Kellyanne Conway who pointed this out after the most recent one. You have a debate and nobody is up there talking about how they're going to improve anybody's lives. I want a more sophisticated, more policy-oriented debate. I was buoyed back in 2016 when Marco Rubio was the first presidential candidate to ever utter the phrase regulatory budgeting, which, well, I know, 99.99% of the people out there, they don't know what it is, but I know it affects 100% of
well, I will say, so I was optimistic in my last answer, and now I will be a little
pessimistic. Got it. It's okay. You can be both.
I really hope that doesn't go, because I'm with you. I love debates, and I think it's such a great tradition. It's a unique tradition in our democracy, because in other countries they don't even have debates, and I think there is obviously a performative aspect. I get it. People think, oh, whatever, but I hope it doesn't go away. I really, and I don't like that. By the way, I do not like that Trump has not participated in the debates. I get strategically why he wouldn't, but just me as someone who enjoys debates, I'm like, I wish he would go. I mean, you want to lead our country.
Oh, I got all kinds of things to send you, Kevin, that I think you'll appreciate about my ideas for all of these. But we are looking at the first presidential election since 1976, where the two major candidates may not debate one another. And that's insane to me.
I don't like that. That doesn't feel good.
No, it again, it's all about, because to me, and I've written about this, elections are almost always about binary choices. You're choosing, even if you have a whole slate of candidates, generally people are choosing between person A and person B. And so, you need to be able to see those two people next to one another in order to get this done. Listen, before I let you go, because I know you got cookies to bake.
It's Christmas season, man. I got to tell you, if you walked into my kitchen right now, it looks like the North Pole exploded in Hershey's chocolate.
That's fantastic. So you've got a new daily show that you're going to.
Yes, no, I do.
Let's talk about this with The Hill.
I have to say, I'm so excited. I worked at The Hill in my early 20s for Bob Cusack, who's the editor-in-chief, and he is, I believe, one of the most transformative media executives in Washington, D.C., if not the country, because thehill.com is the nation's #1 political news site. And it's not even close. And I've worked at other political news organizations, but inside the Beltway, it's not even close. They're beating the comp. It's not even, I mean, it's insane. It's like Trump's leading the polls. I mean, that's how much of a #1 spot, and it's completely nonpartisan. And so, when he asked, when I was on fellowship, would I be interested in coming back as a contributor, and Nexstar, which is an incredible company, they own 200 television affiliates and such a great distribution. They own News Nation now, as well as The Hill.
Okay.
And so there's such an incredible organization. And I started talking to some of those folks, and they said, come back as a contributor and, let's do this show on YouTube. And I thought, I don't even have cable. So I have YouTube. So it's called The Daily Debrief, and it's fast, man. I mean, people say that I'm too loud, that I talk too fast. I'm like, you know what?
I don't know.
If I kept it any quieter or any longer, you all would click somewhere else. So I think it's a lot of fun, and it's fast paced, super nonpartisan. And if you go on to YouTube and you search for The Hill, so that's their username, it's all over. It's called The Daily Debrief, and we're going to have a lot of fun with it. And I will say, I'm not partisan, but the only thing that I am very passionate about are the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, we are recording this conversation. I don't know when this is going to come out, but we are about 3 hours away before the Eagles take on the Dallas Cowboys tonight.
Yes.
So I will say, you might have to get a dose of me if you subscribe to this program with some Eagles analysis.
Okay. We will do that. Okay, before I let you go, I know this isn't technically the Philly food scene, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you. I obviously I'm gonna have to throw in Pat's or Geno's, but I gotta put in Tony Luke's.
Tony's a friend. Okay, so first of all,
there we go. Okay.
Yeah, you don't gotta let me go if you're gonna.
I'm a Tony Luke's guy, so yeah.
So Tony's a friend of mine.
Okay.
I for many years, and actually you should interview him, because
I will.
He has done such incredible work on he's been very open about this, so I'm not talking out of turn. He lost his son to addiction, and he has done such incredible work, nonpartisan work, in terms of that particular issue. And my dog is barking, so I apologize.
No worries, I can't hear it.
But also the other thing is, I'm my Uncle Mike. My Uncle Mike has owned a hoagie shop in Delco where I grew up for 47 plus years.
Wow.
So to me, I love Tony Luke for cheesesteaks, but you got to go to Mikey's and you got to get the prosciutto hoagie with provolone and tell him that his nephew Kev sent you.
I will do it.
And it's the best. I mean,
we will stop up there on the next trip north. My daughter especially loves a good prosciutto hoagie. So,
oh my gosh, it's literally the best. And then also, I will say, if you're in DC area, the Italian store is the closest thing you're gonna get. But yeah, that's it. That's me in a nutshell.
Kevin, listen, so folks need to tune in to you on your show on YouTube. Go and check it out. Kevin Cirilli, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. Thank you.
So, guys, this has been another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. As we've been talking food here, please hit the subscribe button. If you're listening, you're watching us on YouTube, you're listening on one of the many podcast platforms that are out there. I'm Andrew Langer. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.